The American naval blockade of Iran just got hit. The USS Carney, a high-value Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, struck by what initial reports suggest was a coordinated swarm of Shahed 238 jet-powered drones. And within hours, the People's Liberation Army Navy did the unthinkable. Two Chinese Type 055 Renhai-class destroyers, the most powerful surface combatants in Beijing's arsenal, entered the Gulf of Oman and positioned themselves directly between the U.S. Sixth Fleet and the Iranian coastline. Ladies and gentlemen, we are no longer looking at a regional skirmish or a simple enforcement of sanctions. This is the moment the post-Cold War order officially fractured. And what is unfolding right now in the waters off the Strait of Hormuz is something the Pentagon didn't expect for at least another decade. Let me break it all down. Hit subscribe right now if you want the real strategic analysis behind the headlines. We cover what the mainstream media won't, every single day. Turn on notifications so you never miss when we expose the next phase of the global escalation. Do it now. Here's the sequence. At 0400 hours on April 18th, the U.S. Navy attempted to board the MV Kunlun, a Chinese-flagged supertanker carrying 2 million barrels of Iranian crude. The immediate consequence was a direct radar lock from an Iranian coastal battery near Bandar Abbas. This wasn't a standard game of maritime chicken. This was a calculated bait and switch. The Wall Street Journal and Reuters have both confirmed that as the U.S. boarding party prepared to move, the Chinese destroyers Nanchang and Lhasa broke their holding patterns and accelerated to 30 knots toward the American position. Now, the Iranian supreme leader had already warned that any attempt to seize sovereign property would trigger a multi-point response. That warning? It just got cashed in. The counteraction is happening as we speak. Iranian fast attack craft are currently laying sophisticated EM-52 rising mines across the deep water channels of the strait, while the Chinese destroyers have established a no-go zone that effectively pins the U.S. Sixth Fleet against the Omani coast. But here's where it gets bigger than a local naval standoff. See, Beijing didn't just move ships. There are emerging reports of a massive cyber intrusion targeting the SCADA systems of the Colonial Pipeline, disrupting fuel flows across the eastern seaboard. The deployment of Russian-made S-400 missile batteries to the Iranian port of Chabahar, manned by Russian advisors. The mobilization of 15,000 Hezbollah fighters toward the Israeli border in the Sheba farms. A coordinated sell-off of $85 billion in U.S. treasuries by Chinese state-owned banks within a single 6-hour window. Let that sink in. Global maritime insurance, frozen. U.S. domestic fuel distribution, compromised. And the Pentagon just issued a DEFCON 3 alert demanding that China immediately withdraw its surface combatants from the exclusion zone. This isn't a regional oil dispute anymore. This is a direct challenge to the U.S. Navy's ability to project power in the Eastern Hemisphere. And Beijing is making sure the entire world sees the American Sixth Fleet as a trapped asset rather than a liberating force. Now, you might be asking, why would China risk a direct kinetic confrontation with a U.S. carrier strike group over a single tanker of Iranian oil? Why would they put their most advanced warships in the crosshairs of the Aegis combat system? Why would they trigger a global economic meltdown that hurts their own manufacturing sector? Because China isn't fighting to protect a shipment of oil. China is fighting to dismantle the 80-year-old American security architecture of the Middle East. When the U.S. established the naval blockade last week, understand the critical detail most mainstream coverage misses. The U.S. effectively told Beijing that Washington controls the energy lifeblood of the Chinese economy. Beijing lost its strategic patience. The Chinese Communist Party immediately pivoted, declaring that the U.S. blockade was an act of piracy that demands a proportional maritime correction. So when Foreign Minister Wang Yi says that the era of unilateral sea control is over, that tells you everything. A new power center, led by the China-Iran-Russia axis of resistance, is running the show. The old mechanism of the petrodollar is dead, and China has decided this is their Battle of Tsushima moment, the historical turning point where an Eastern power decisively breaks the maritime dominance of a Western empire. This isn't about the price of gas. It's about who writes the rules for the 21st century. Now here's the part no one in Washington wants to talk about. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin told the press during a Pentagon briefing last Tuesday that the U.S. Navy could effectively and indefinitely seal the Strait of Hormuz without significant risk to the fleet. But according to a leaked internal assessment from the Office of Naval Intelligence, the current U.S. deployment in the Gulf is designed for low-intensity counterterrorism operations, not a high-end peer-state confrontation. That's a 14-day gap between political promises of total control and the actual logistical reality of ammunition expenditures in a swarm drone environment. And already, on day 4, here's what's happened. The USS Abraham Lincoln's propulsion system was reportedly damaged during a high-speed maneuver to avoid a suicide boat swarm, a failure confirmed by ship spotters and verified by the Washington Post. The Navy's Spy-1 radar system struggled to distinguish between civilian fishing vessels and the hundreds of low-cost Shahed 136 drones, leading to an unacceptable expenditure rate of SM-2 missiles. Reuters is now reporting that the port of Fujairah has officially denied docking rights to U.S. vessels, fearing Iranian retaliation. The U.S. Fifth Fleet headquarters in Bahrain had to be partially evacuated after an unconfirmed direct energy incident targeted the facility's communications array. The New York Times is now reporting that senior Navy commanders are deeply concerned about the fleet's ability to maintain the blockade while defending against Chinese electronic warfare. They're failing in too many places, too fast and too unpredictably, and the Pentagon simply can't protect every asset simultaneously. This was supposed to be a surgical enforcement of international law. That's the exact phrase National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan used with reporters at the White House. But Iran and China turned it into something very different. They turned it into an attrition trap. Let's zoom out because this stopped being a U.S.-Iran naval standoff about 72 hours ago. The Russian Federation has officially announced a joint naval exercise with the Iranian Navy in the North Arabian Sea, moving the Slava-class cruiser Marshal Ustinov into striking distance of U.S. assets. These are nuclear-capable platforms. Israel is moving F-35I Adir squadrons toward the northern border, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu just said that any Iranian move to weaponize the blockade will be met with the full weight of the Israeli Air Force. That's 4 nuclear-armed nations now actively positioning for a direct kinetic exchange. 4. And Turkey just closed the Bosphorus to all military traffic, citing unprecedented regional instability. Saudi Arabia has suspended all Aramco shipments through the Red Sea after Houthi rebels launched 3 Quds-4 cruise missiles at the Ras Tanura terminal. Over 1,200 commercial flights have been canceled across the Persian Gulf and Levant. The European Union is scrambling to figure out its energy logistics now that both the Strait of Hormuz and the transit routes through the Suez are compromised. WTI crude just touched $112.45 and is climbing by the hour. European natural gas prices spiked to $180 per megawatt hour, a 40% increase since the blockade began. The yen in Tokyo jumped to 165 against the dollar, a sign that capital is fleeing emerging markets at speed and seeking refuge in what little stability is left. Investors are dumping everything from tech stocks to commercial real estate in a desperate bid for liquidity. And we're on day 5. Here's what most coverage is missing. Beijing knows it can't win a sustained global blue water war against the United States Navy. At least not yet. The math doesn't work. You're facing 11 nuclear-powered supercarriers, over 60 attack submarines, and an integrated satellite network that China is still trying to replicate. That's an unwinnable equation for China in a vacuum. But China isn't trying to win a surface battle. China is trying to make the American voter end the war before it even starts. Think about it. Every American sailor killed in a drone strike has a massive domestic political impact. Every tactical setback, like the damage to the USS Carney, becomes a congressional consequence where the current administration is grilled over preparedness. Every economic disruption, the $5.50 a gallon gas, the 20% spike in grocery bills because of shipping costs, becomes a voter pain point that the American audience feels at the gas pump and the utility bill. The Biden administration built its brand on restoring American alliances and stability. They mocked the previous administration over chaotic foreign policy and unilateral withdrawal. And now, under their watch, the U.S. Sixth Fleet is effectively trapped, oil prices are at historic highs, and a global war is looming. The opposition party doesn't even need to campaign. The footage of American ships being shadowed by Chinese destroyers does it for them. Fox News, which the president has personally attacked and dismissed as unreliable, is going to run every single image of the blockade failure on a loop. They will show the empty shelves and the long lines at the gas station. And when the 2026 midterms come, the current leadership loses its mandate. A president without a congressional majority is a powerless figurehead. China knows this. They are playing the long game. That's the real strategy, not a naval victory in the Gulf, but a political collapse in Washington. According to analysts at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, retired Navy admirals, and senior intelligence officials at the DIA who have weighed in, the consensus is clear. The U.S. is currently overextended and underprepared for this specific dual-front escalation. There are scenarios in which a diplomatic off-ramp is found, perhaps through a Swiss-mediated ceasefire, before the worst consequences materialize. There are also scenarios in which this escalation pattern continues, costs mount, and the conflict becomes a generational disaster that marks the definitive end of the American century. The honest answer is, nobody knows. And I mean that literally. Every military analyst, every think tank like Brookings, every intelligence agency is operating on outdated models right now. They assumed China would wait for Taiwan. They assumed Iran would fold under economic pressure. They were wrong on both counts. The Economist published a piece yesterday saying the global economy is one miscalculation away from a 1930s-style depression. But here's the critical point. Whatever comes after this naval standoff is going to be more complex and more radical. It will be characterized by a permanent division of the global trade network and the rise of a fortress economy in the West. There are already emerging indications from regional intelligence that Iran is preparing to test a nuclear device in the Dashti Kavir Desert. Unconfirmed reports suggest the advisors from Russia are actually technical experts for warhead miniaturization. Internal factions within the Saudi royal family are reportedly fragmenting, with some questioning the kingdom's reliance on a U.S. security guarantee that can't even keep the strait open. Meanwhile, a senior IRGC commander just announced, and I quote, "The sea will become a graveyard for those who think they own the world's oil." We don't know what that means. Could be a massive mine offensive. Could be a coordinated strike on the global subsea fiber optic cables. Could be something nobody's even considered yet. Because when a regional power like Iran decides it has nothing left to lose, and when a global power like China decides to back them, every red line disappears. Every calculation goes out the window, and every prediction becomes worthless. We are witnessing something that will reshape the Indo-Pacific security balance, the global energy market, and American domestic solvency for a generation. And we're only 5 days in. I'm going to keep covering this as it develops, pulling from Pentagon briefing documents, shipping data from Lloyd's List, and independent intelligence sources, because no single outlet is giving you the full picture. If you want to stay informed without the mainstream noise, subscribe and turn on notifications. I'll be back with an updated analysis as soon as the next major development breaks. Stay safe out there. I'll see you in the next one.